All right, hey guys. Today I'm talking to Troy. I'll let you introduce yourself in a second, but I'm MikroTik Marc with RemoteWinBox, and today we're taking a look at security best practices as it relates to firewall filtering. One of the things we noticed was that some of Troy's routers weren't connecting to our service successfully, and as we were kind of investigating at things that were going on, we noticed two things. Basically, one was that one of the default configuration firewall rules that MikroTik suggests was missing from the configuration. And that part of the configuration says, hey, when this router generates some traffic and goes out to the internet, I want to allow that return traffic to successfully respond to the router and not get firewall dropped. So that was one piece that was problematic for a couple of routers. And then as we kind of looked a little further, what we noticed is that some of the protections maybe that are desirable are not being achieved. And so I kind of wanted to take this session and talk about, hey, what's the best practice for security on firewall filtering that's lightweight on the CPU, but still gives you an incredible amount of security and protection from internet attacks. So Troy, introduce yourself, who you're with, and what you do day to day.
Well, my name is Troy. I'm a small WISP in Ohio and self-taught MikroTik user. So I realize some of my, my settings may not scale with me. So that's why I'm anxious to go through this process.
Awesome. Yeah, so let's start off, I guess, go ahead and pull up Winbox. First, I want to talk about strategy. And so there's a couple of different strategies out there for firewalling. And one of them that kind of used to be really popular is, hey, I'm going to allow the things that I want to attach to my router to be tracked. And then as they get tracked, I'm going to say, hey, if they try too many times, I'm going to mark those guys as a bad guy. And then I'm going to have another firewall rule that says, hey, when I see enough bad guys, block them and don't allow them access. The problem with that kind of mentality or strategy is that it consumes a fair amount of processing power and memory to track all those connections attempts. And then what can happen is that if there's a large amount of attacks that occur on this router, it'll consume a whole bunch of resources, CPU and RAM, and cause that router to be doing a lot heavier load than it needs to be. On one edge router that was under a lot of heavy work, I literally saw changing strategies here take a CPU down from 60% down to 18%, just by implementing a firewall filter strategy that said, hey, here are my known networks, and I allow access from my known networks. And if you're not part of my known networks, you're just not allowed to talk to me at all. And so that's the strategy we're going to implement today. So in order to do that, we're going to start off with address lists. So we open up the IP firewall and head over to address lists. There you go. And so in order to keep your firewall relatively clean and lightweight, address lists can be used so that you've got one firewall rule that can apply to multiple subnets or multiple IP addresses. So in here, we're going to say, these are the places that we're allowed to talk to this router from. So let's say we don't know where the IP address that we're coming from right now is, and we want to be able to find that so we can add it to this address list. Let's go ahead and in the IP firewall here, we're going to hit the mangle rule. Great, and we're going to add a rule here, and we're going to say, hey, during pre-routing, before we've decided what this packet's going to do, in this case, let's find the address that's trying to WinBox to this router right now that you're using for management here. So in pre-routing, let's say the protocol is TCP. So click on protocol, and then dest port will be 8291, which is for WinBox. So dest port 8291. And then under action, we're going to change this from accept to add source to address list. And what this is going to allow us to do is say, hey, whatever the source IP is that generates a TCP 8291 and tries to connect to WinBox, before we route that packet, we're going to add it to this address list. So I like to call it WinBoxer. So just under address list there, put WinBoxer. And if you want to put a timeout so this doesn't age in the so that it doesn't stay around forever, you can put a time limit there, like 24:00:00 to have it only last 1 day. Otherwise, it'll just stay in there forever. Totally up to you which way you like to go. So by doing that, you'll have a 1-day indicator of someone who tried to WinBox to this device.
Okay.
And I think for me personally, I'd probably leave it as never times out. So if you click that down arrow and put none dynamic, and what that means is that that'll come in, and just in case you ever get someone who unexpectedly was able to try to WinBox in, you'll be able to track their IP and know where that came from.
Okay.
All right, so say okay. And now if we go to address lists, you can see here we've got WinBoxers. So those are some locations that have tried to connect to WinBox on this device.
And this would be my public IP that I'm adding through.
So hopefully both of these are
Yep.
part of your known network.
Yeah.
So now what you can do is just double click on that and do copy. And let's call this address list trusted. And then do the same thing for your private IP. And now, are there any other networks that you know that you would definitely connect from that we should add to trusted? Ultimately, it's pretty safe to use your private IPs. So if you use 172.16 stuff for your private network, I would always want to be able to come in from my private network. So I would feel pretty comfortable going 172.16. 00/12 is allowed to attempt to authenticate to this device. I like the idea of layered security, so I'll have strong usernames, strong passwords, and then only allow access from that private side of the network that hopefully isn't routed or bridged to any customers.
So this one is, I just logged in through, so I went through Splashtop and I clicked on WinBox and opened up this core. And that's the IP I have up there, but
yeah, so what I would do here is just change that from 1048 to 00 and then put a /12. And in network speak, that's saying, hey, anything that starts with 172.16 through 172.31, allow that to connect, allow that to authenticate, go through the authentication process to this router. And basically everything else we're going to deny. So one of the things that I want to make sure you're aware of here is that if you miss any of the locations that you try to connect from, what'll happen after we harden the firewall here is that you won't be able to connect from that location. And there are a couple of strategies that we can use. And one of the ones that we use is called port knocking. So we can put in a sequence of events that you know how to do, and that will trigger, just like we added the source to address list here, we can add the source to the trusted address list if they know the secret knock, right, to do the certain things in a certain order. And that will allow you to get access when you're off network. Maybe we'll save that for another video, but you also should be able to go back to any of these known trusted locations and add more locations if you need to.
So these two just popped in.
Yeah, so if you look at your log, let's take a look here. And I don't see that any, I don't see any red errors if somebody failed to log in. So that could just be somebody's port scanning that port and seeing if it's open or not. They didn't try to connect and authenticate over WinBox, but they did check to see if that port's open.
Okay.
You can see that this thing has an internet IP on it. It is attempted to be accessed all day long, every day. It's not like you're getting invalid connection attempts. But people are definitely port scanning it and checking to see whether those ports are open so that later on they can come back and try and brute force attack it to gain access.
Okay.
So we can prevent that from happening by, again, adding a firewall filter that says, hey, only allow my trusted networks to get access to this router. Everything else just get dropped.
Okay.
So now I always recommend to everyone who's making firewall filter changes, this can drop your session. I myself have in the past locked myself out of routers. So I always recommend at this point to turn safe mode on before making the drop rule change mentality.
Now should I load in my public, like I've got public IPs that are like /24s or /25. Should I add those in as trusted on this, or?
So that's up to you. If you use different locations there that are part of your /24 that you feel like you want in here, absolutely add them in now.
Well, I have to go through this address list for everything or just on my cores?
Well, so I'll talk a little bit about what I would do with RemoteWinBox Fleet Commander. I would generate your master list here, right? So maybe it's 172.16.00/12, and then your public network /24. And then I would put both of those in Fleet Commander as an address list add. And then you can click one button and have it deploy to all of your MikroTiks. And then we can do the same thing with your firewall filter. You may want to take a little closer hand holding on your firewall filter, because I know some of your routers have one firewall strategy, some of them have another one. You probably want to use a little closer scrutiny as you're looking through those ones. Okay. But so certainly if you know that you go to different locations where you're going to get a different public IP address, either add all those addresses here or add the 1/24. And again, if you do the layered security approach, on one hand, you would, if you list your whole /24, you would be exposed to potentially being brute forced by your customers. But again, if you do some layered security here where you say, hey, I also have really strong credentials that there's no way they're ever going to break those credentials. Then you can say, hey, even though it's a small sliver of allowable addresses, I'm pretty sure my customers aren't going to attack me, and B, I'm going to have a second layer there where my credentials are not easily guessed. So then if you've got a reasonable access for now, we can go hit filter rules. And right now, if we take a look at the rules here, basically it says we've got the allow return traffic generated by this router. And if we open that one up, we'll just talk through that quickly to show others that, hey, sometimes if you've built your own custom firewall rule and haven't started with MikroTik's default, this one can be missing. And this one's really important. So again, on the input chain, what we're saying is down at the bottom, connection state is established or related. That means that traffic we've generated and initiated from this router goes out to the internet, does something like get DNS, get NTP. For our situation here, it tries to establish a VPN connection to our service. All the return traffic is not allowed unless this rule exists to say, hey, I want that return traffic to be accepted. So this is real quick and easy. You say input, established, related, action equals accept. And that's all the rule has to be here. If you check out MikroTik's wiki, you'll see that it's right there in their default configuration for a hardened firewall. So moving on to how we're going to protect this router, let's go ahead and add a rule. And in this case, we're going to say, hey, when you're on the input chain, and under advanced in RouterOS v6 on v7, I think they merged the pages. And the source address list is going to be trusted. Perfect. And then our action here is going to be accept. And what I would do is put a comment on here that says, this is allow access from trusted networks. Perfect. And say okay and okay. And now what we're going to want to do is drag that rule up to the top. And so now what we've said here is we're going to allow the access from the address list trusted. You'll see those counters are already going up. And now what we want to do is say, hey, basically, if you're not part of my trusted network, I want to deny access for you there. Now, before we move on, is this router talking any routing protocols to any of its neighbors? Are you doing BGP or OSPF?
I'm doing OSPF. BGP is through a managed router through my upstream, but not on these routers.
Okay. Let's look at IP addresses real quick. All right, so we've got a loopback. Yep, you're doing OSPF. We've got a couple of public IPs. You must have two upstreams here. And then I see we've got our private IP, and then we've got our RemoteWinBox address. So we can take the easy approach or the harder approach. What I suggest we do is say, hey, your OSPF network here, which is going to be your loopback addresses and your 172.16. We already did 172.16/12, right?
Yep.
So that means OSPF is going to stay established. I would just add the loopback network. So you're doing 10.255.255. I guess you can say either 0/24. I don't know how big that network is, but I would add that to trusted also, so that you don't block any of that traffic here.
So I can just copy.
Yep. Perfect. So just to reiterate again, if you're doing BGP, OSPF, any other dynamic protocol, you'll probably want to at least specify those subnets that are directly attached to other MikroTiks are part of the trusted network, so that communication can continue to establish and pass there.
So now my loopback network, I think I've got like 20 or something like that, or 22. So I could do a smaller subnet, right?
You sure could, but it's also that the 10.255 is part of RFC 1918 private space. So it should never come over the internet unless somebody's doing the wrong thing with their routing.
Right.
So the point of that is that really should only be coming from your network. Again, with layers of security, that's relatively safe. Something that I would personally probably do, so that as your network continues to grow, you don't have to keep messing with that prefix.
Okay.
And again, we could layer on some additional security. After we lock this router down and put some hardening on, we could put some additional tracking, because then instead of everyone on the internet hitting this interface, it would be a small subset. And then we could say, hey, now if you come from the small subset and you do 5 tries, and then you get locked out. Yep, so if we head back to filter rules, what we can do now is say anything that is not part of our trusted just gets dropped. So this is a super easy rule. Let's hit the plus. And at this point, we say, if your chain input and action drop. And the firewall filtering gets processed in order. So as you add this rule, it'll go to the bottom of the list, which means that it'll only get processed after everything else gets processed. So trusted networks covers all of our OSPF adjacencies, all of our link local traffic, and all the rest of that. And so the only thing that's getting dropped now is traffic that is not part of our trusted network that's trying to get to the input of this router. Forward traffic remains unaffected, which means stuff that you're routing to your customers and routing from your customers. So your upload, download traffic didn't get affected at all. This is just traffic destined to this router specifically. And that's it. At this point, you can see you've got a couple of chain inputs. Again, if we wanted...
This is my old rule, so should I get rid of that one?
That rule will no longer be needed. So at this point, yep, you can disable that guy, or
I'll disable him for now.
Drop it. What was in there? You were saying traffic from the internet.
So it was input drop, but it was based on the main port that was this router is hooked to my fiber provider, so it's transitioning from their fiber to me. So anything trying to come in was going to be dropped.
So yeah, your strategy was, if it's from outside my network and trying to come in, I'm going to drop it to this router. And the one possible scenario that wasn't covered here is if they're trying to come in on what you've got labeled as orange, that would still be allowed. And yeah, obviously that's still an attack vector that maybe wasn't thought of.
Yeah.
Yep.
So do I need to go back in and add my other, like this is a different private IP or public IP. Do I need to add that into the address list for trusted?
So again, keep in mind, trusted doesn't mean that I'm going to allow deny traffic that goes through the router. It's only when I want to terminate stuff like SSH, WinBox. If I want to have anything that's OSPF, BGP, when I want to talk to this specific router, this core, I want those are the IPs that you want to allow to talk to this router, not going through it, but talking to it.
Okay.
And if you wanted to see what IPs those were that are trying to connect, again, you can head over to Mangle. And I don't suggest leaving this on all the time because that's going to consume some processing power. But you can certainly come in here and add another rule. You can copy that rule and say, hey, let's see what's trying to talk to my router. So you can say, hey, pre-routing, get rid of your protocol and desk port. And you can say when, yep. And then under advanced, this is an opposite scenario. So we're going to say, click on source address list and pick trusted. And now we're going to say when they're not trusted, we're going to say, these are untrusted networks. So you click that checkbox right next to source address list before trusted, and that inverts the selection. So rather than being trusted, now we're going to say, hey, these guys are not trusted. So now we go to action, add source to address list. And instead of Winboxer, we're going to say maybe bad guy. You can say untrusted. I'd probably put bad guy or untrusted, one of the two. And yep, hit apply and OK. And now at this point, we can look at our address lists and we should start seeing who's trying to talk to us here. And you could spend some time going through this, but you can see we've already got 2,000 bad guy potentials that are trying to do something here. Obviously, if any of those IPs are known, you'll go, hey, this is something that I actually did want to allow. But if any of those IPs are unknown, then that means those are people from all over the world trying to talk to this router and just scanning it and seeing what's open and allowed and available.
So this IP is part of my public that I have, a /25.
Yeah. So one question is, why did that guy want to talk to you? So what you can do here is go with a further firewall rule. Go back to your Mangle. Yeah, we need to modify this guy because this pre-routing rule is actually applying to all traffic, not just input traffic. That's part of the problem with, not problem, but one of the things to know about Mangle. So we need to fix this rule up because it's given us a little bit of wrong data. Click on the chain at the top there. There is input. That's what we want. So when input, get rid of the in interface. All right, go advanced. So when we're input and not trusted, action is bad guy. Yeah, that's what we want. So I just had the wrong chain. There we go. All right, now we want to clear counters on that because we had it written wrong in the first place. You can either reset all or just reset. Perfect. And now under address lists, there's an easy way and a hard way to do this. The hard way is to kind of use WinBox to do it because there's a lot of addresses here. I'd rather do it the easy way. So open a new terminal and do /IP firewall space address list, and then do remove the square bracket, the word find space where, and then space list equals bad double quote bad space guy the way you wrote it, end quote, and then end square bracket, and then hit enter. And that's going to purge all of those in one step. They're all going to disappear here. All right, now we've got some new ones popping in, and these ones are folks trying to port scan or talk to this router.
Okay.
And you can look them up if you want to. ipinfo.io is a great place to use for programmatic access or just checking out, hey, who owns this IP? What AS does it belong to? What city and country is this in? I use that one a lot.
Okay.
So these are all the folks that are trying to be bad guys to your router that you haven't been aware, but they've been trying to be bad guys to your router ever since this router's been in service.
All right. So if I don't want that, does that use a lot of memory or CPU?
It's using some. Ideally, you would want to pull those mangles out. It might be nice to kind of take a look at it for now and see where it's at.
If not, just you said disable these two, or?
I would, yep. And so what I would do is just disable them, not remove them, so that you can turn them on at any point that you want to. Those address lists are going to stick around forever. We didn't put an age out date on them. So that's part of the reason why you can put like a 1-day timeout, is so that then those guys can age out so that you don't care about keeping them all the time. But keeping track of the time takes resources too. So that's why the best case scenario is that you just have a firewall filter and a firewall facility that's tuned and doesn't really care about bad guys. It just says block them. They don't need the access and they're not allowed to get access.
But I could copy this and just rerun it and it would delete it, correct?
You sure can. Yep. And now hit enter. There it goes. All right. So as long as we still got access, if you uncheck safe mode, that's one of the things to remember to do at the end of your maintenance. It's always uncheck safe mode so that you don't lose all of the work that you've done over the last minutes or hours, which I've done that before also. Resolved an outage and then everybody was tired and we forgot to get to it. So now at this point, you've got a well-tuned firewall that says, hey, this router is protected. You've got access from your trusted network only. Everything else gets dropped. Nobody can talk to this guy, but he's still able to communicate with OSPF, keep your network running. Throughput traffic is still running just fine.
Okay, so basically, we went in and added these trusted networks, and then the filter rule just drops everything coming in that's not part of that trusted network.
You got it. And that means that it's running nice and smooth. Hey guys, so one of the things we missed here was, what if you're providing DNS services on this MikroTik? And let's make sure that if we are providing DNS services to our customers, that we're allowing that to happen through the firewall. So first off, what I'm going to do is come in here to IPDNS, and you can see that this MikroTik is allowing remote requests. And we're recursively looking up DNS queries up here on servers. I've got a cache here that shows me what are the addresses that are being looked up. So let's take a look at the firewall settings required here. I'm going to head over to IP Firewall, and what we need to do is ensure that we allow traffic on DNS before we drop it. So there's two ways to handle it. All right, so if you have just one subnet that you need to provide DNS service on, the easiest way is to just come in here and say, hey, on chain input protocol UDP, desk port 53, that's DNS queries. And you can specify your in interface if you have customers coming in only on one interface. But let's say I just know their subnet and I don't know which interface they're going to come in on because they might come in on a couple of different ports. I'm just going to say, hey, when the source address is, and let's say here that my subnet for customers is 10.0.0/16. I always add comments. So this is allowed DNS when customers. And there we go. Let's take this rule, put it above any of my drops. And at this point, now customers will be able to get DNS. Now, that's a great rule if you just have one subnet that provides access to all of your customers. But let's say I have a couple of allocations and I still want to lock down this router with hardened firewall, but I don't want to add maybe 10 or 15 different subnets with individual rules. So the easy way to do that is with address lists. So in address lists, I would just hit add. Again, I'm going to put on this list allow DNS, and then I can put in my same customer subnets. And let's say I've got 10.0 that I have customers on. And then let's say I also provide services on a public subnet. So 66.77.88.0/24. Sure that belongs to somebody. I don't know who it is. But let's just say that that's a customer subnet of mine. So I'll go through there and run through all of my subnets that I need to allow DNS queries on, hit allow DNS, and then I head back to my firewall filters. So now let's say I want to use my address list as my firewall filter. So similarly, I'm going to come in here, input, protocol UDP, desk port 53. And again, I could pick my interface, but in this case, I'm not going to. I'm just going to come over here to source address list. And my source address list is going to be allow DNS, the one we just built. And what's going to happen now is allow DNS for customers. And that's going to allow any of that list to be able to contact this server for DNS queries. Again, drag that up above your drop rules. And in this case now, I have the ability to service my customers' DNS queries. So for completeness, it probably makes sense to come in here, copy this rule, and also allow TCP traffic for 53. These are DNS updates. If any of your customers run their own DNS servers, it might make sense to have their TCP traffic for 53 allowed. So that wraps up our best practices in security with MikroTik firewall filtering. I hope you enjoyed it and found it useful. Have a great day.